Hello, class. We had a Zoom session this morning, but unfortunately, I had a teacher fail and I did not get it recorded. So I'm going to do a short little recap about what we went over this morning. If you have not looked through the long announcement I posted, I suggest you do that ASAP. It says we will now have a 10-point multiple choice quiz for each chapter, and you can only take it once and it will be timed. You have 20 minutes to complete it. I will try to cover a few of those questions in the next Zoom session we're going to have this week on Thursday at 11:30 a.m. That may not be a regular thing. We may have just one Zoom session a week, or we may have the Zoom session one in the morning and then one in the evening to try to accommodate everybody. So we discussed that, and then I also mentioned that your exams will be timed online, created through Connect, but connected to Canvas. And then we discussed a little bit the absorption versus variable. I did post a video about it in the Learning Resources folder. I just posted that last night. So if you looked at it yesterday, it wasn't there, but it is now. And you should always, I didn't mention this in the Zoom, but I'm going to set up a module for each chapter. I will try to get as many out there as soon as possible. So if you want to work ahead, that's fine. But we'll have an exam over chapters 6 and 7. That would be one exam. We'll have an exam over 8 and 9, and then we'll have an exam over 10. And then your final exam. So if you find yourself in quarantine board and you want to work ahead, that will be fine. I will just try to get all those things posted ASAP. So then what we did is we discussed, I am going to share my screen with you and go over a few PowerPoint slides. So we discussed the difference between absorption and variable. And in the future, I will have a little bit more interactive things to do besides me just lecturing on some slides. I'm going to set up a Kahoot that we can do together, and possibly a poll everywhere, whatever is easiest, so I can get your feedback on what you're learning. Okay, so we discussed that chapter 6 is comparing variable costing to absorption costing. Absorption costing, as we look through this first slide, I love this slide. I mentioned that during the Zoom session. It will take these the absorption costing is the traditional costing. That's what you learned in financial accounting. It says every cost you incur to create your product goes into the product cost. It goes into the calculation of your inventory value. If we were creating toasters, there would be some plastic. I guess a toaster also has some metal in it, and some kind of wiring. That would be direct materials. There would be labor. Excuse me, I had to sneeze. There'd be labor involved in putting those materials together to create the toaster. There would be overhead, such as your facility that you use, the machines used to create your toasters, the factory rent, the janitors in your factory, the oil you used in your machines to keep them running. So all of those different things would actually be added into the cost of making your product and absorption. Everything else we categorized as a period cost, selling and administrative. Now, what we kind of moved into more in our class was that variable costing says only the things that are truly variable should be classified as product cost. And we talked about this in the Zoom session earlier. Product cost are saying those are the values that get debited to the asset account, to the inventory account as you're making your product. So variable costing only includes the direct materials, direct labor, and the variable, only the things that are variable that actually go into the making of your product. The bottom section, it would expense all of these things and not record them as part of the asset value, including the fixed manufacturing overhead. So you can see it's just that main line there. So if that is true, which method would produce the highest value for work in process and finished goods inventory? Which one would have the higher inventory value? And during the Zoom session, Joe said absorption. That is correct. Absorption will value more of the cost in inventory initially. Now, it's not that those costs are never expensed. It's that they're only expensed when the product is sold under absorption. Variable says my product costs me only the variable thing. So variable would use this $10 right here. $10 is what, if we're making a toaster, variable is going to take that $10 and say it cost me $10 to make the toaster. But absorption would say it cost me $10 in materials, labor, and variable overhead, plus it would add in this fixed. This fixed overhead, because it's a part of making the product, would be added in. Now, you don't just take $10 and add this lump sum to say one toaster cost you $150,010 to make. You spread that out over all the units produced. So if I take $150,000 and I divide by 25,000, it would say there are $6 of fixed manufacturing overhead included in each toaster. So I would add that in here on the absorption side to calculate the product cost, to calculate the cost of those toasters, the cost of each item in my inventory. Variable will always have a lower product cost per unit. Absorption will always have a higher product cost per unit because it's taking the fixed manufacturing overhead and adding it into the product cost category, to the part of our inventory. It's not that variable cost just dismisses this and doesn't account for it. We have to account for it. But it would call all of this an expense. It would never initially call this fixed manufacturing overhead part of the product. It gets expensed in its entirety. So why do I have to learn this, Tal? Absorption is GAAP. That is GAAP approved. That is what you've actually been doing all along in accounting, and that is right. Companies have to follow absorption to create their financial statements, their external income statement, and their external balance sheet. But variable matches better with what is truly happening to our cash. And so companies will also run their cost systems based on the variable rules. And therefore they can see if they have kind of an inflated net income. So in this example, it says they had 20,000 units that were sold during the year. Now that is not going to match the amount of inventory that they produced, because if we go back to that prior slide, it said they had produced 25,000 units. So variable took the $10 per unit, multiplied it by the number of units sold, and that's how it came up with their cost of goods sold. All income statements always start with sales or revenue, right? If we had sold 20,000 toasters for $30 a piece, we would have $600,000 of revenue. My cost of goods sold is subtracted, and all other variable expenses are subtracted when I am working on the variable income statement. Then at the bottom, it's segmented by fixed expenses. So the entire $150,000 of manufacturing overhead is subtracted here because it is categorized as a fixed cost. These numbers will not jive or correspond exactly on the absorption income statement, but in a sense, they're just rearranged. So I'm going to flip over to the absorption income statement. Remember, this one says 90,000. And you're going to see the absorption income statement has a higher net income. That is because they didn't sell all of their units. And part of that fixed overhead, it was 150,000 divided by 25,000, so it was $6 a piece. $6 a piece on 5,000 units is left in inventory and not expensed yet, according to absorption. You will see this 60,000 of variable selling and administrative cost. I go back to the prior slide, is actually included in the other slide, but on the top. So it's just rearranged in a different spot on the other statement. This statement is segmented by variable cost at the top and fixed at the bottom. The absorption is segmented by just cost of goods sold at the top, your product cost, and then your period, all selling and administrative at the bottom, right? This 100,000 of fixed right down here, it will correspond, sorry, with the fixed selling administrative on the other sheet, right? It's down there at the bottom below that 150 that's red. So where you're finding a difference is in the cost of goods sold. The other sheet showed showed $10 a unit, 20,000 units. So this number up here is, instead of being 320, it was 200,000. The difference is how they're accounting for that fixed man overhead. Absorption is putting it in with part of the product. And if I don't sell all the product, not all of that fixed overhead is getting expensed. This is the next section that I want to cover, is how I reconcile, or how I show the difference between the two net incomes. But I will primarily talk about that on Thursday. That's really what we went over in the Zoom session. So I apologize that I did not get that recorded properly on the first time, but I will post this recording, and please email me if you have any questions. I will try to be diligent to respond to your emails quickly, and I hope that I will see several of you again on Thursday. We'll keep it kind of short, just so that you can get a feel for what we're doing, but I'll try to make Thursday a little bit more interactive and working out some homework problems with you. Okay, great. Thank you.